I know it doesn't sound like it, but I'm actually super excited for this video. We'll get to why this is in here in a second. But first, I've waited for this for a really long time now. I did a lot of research, and from what I can tell, this Arc A770 is better than the current PC I have under this desk. So obviously we're going to put it in the server. Now why is this here? What even is this thing? So just get like actual benchmarks, because those don't really exist online. It's really interesting. There are benchmarks, but they're all old. No one ever updates them. So I did actual benchmarks on this computer. So we're gonna see how good this A770 really is. This is a Radeon R5 340. I have no idea when this was supposed to come out, but according to GPU-Z, it's from 2013. And even for like a 2013 card, it's kind of bad. In some of the benchmarks, I was getting literally 0.5 FPS. But it's all for science. So I have actually opened this just to make sure the card was actually there. I mean, I bought it off of like a trusted seller, but it's always a risk. Ta-da! I know I sound so excited, but actually I really am. I delayed opening this until I was done editing my last video, but oh, it looks so pretty. It looks so nice. I don't know much about Sparkle. I believe they're a Chinese manufacturer, but I know they are pretty reputable, at least recently. I do really like this blue PCB. That's so pretty. And look, all these pins are like pristine. I know it's hard for you guys to see with the blurry iPod camera, but oh. There's a QR code here, but I'm not sure what that actually does. Ooh, the red light. Ooh. It just so happens that the 700 watt smart Thermaltake power supply has two 8 pins. So it's literally perfect for this card. It still has the red light. I'm not sure why. Because both PCIEs are in now. Ooh. It's hard for you guys to see, but this is like a royal blue. It's so pretty. So I am streaming this through AnyDesk, so it's gonna look a little choppy right now. If we go to OBS, I don't believe, yeah, we don't have the encoder yet. And if we look through GPU-Z, it's just a Microsoft Basic Display Adapter. So, since we're just waiting here, I really like making this kind of content. This is the kind of content that I originally wanted to make on my original channel back in like 2017. Even though it's expensive, I really like doing this. Supports resizable bar, but it's either disabled in BIOS or your motherboard doesn't support it. That's fine. We don't need a resizable bar right now. Let's open OCCT. This is an app I found recently. It's actually really cool for monitoring your system. It's kind of like a mix of GPU-Z and Task Manager. I like how it shows the power draw as well. That's really nice. 58 watts from the Threadripper, 46 from the Arc. Okay, so the game is really loud. I'm gonna turn it down in post, but all of these settings are as close as I could get them to what I actually use. The only major difference is the resolution scaling, where I use DLSS on the 3060. Okay, I'm a little surprised by this result. 33 FPS. That's about expected. Honestly, that's about expected. That's more than I get in Cyberpunk normally without DLSS on. So it's been 2 days, I think, since the last clip, or a day and a half, something like that. I don't know. I don't remember. But since then, I've done quite a bit. Resizable bar is enabled. So I didn't film any of it, and it took a very, very, very long time to do. I modified my BIOS to enable resizable bar by default because the BIOS doesn't actually support it, while others on the X399 chipset do. So I learned how to do that, and I enabled resizable bar. So now the A770 is actually being used how it's meant to be. We can go back and close that now. And if we go back to Fortnite, things immediately look better. There are less jagged edges. We've got XESS on, but honestly it doesn't help that much. And then we've got everything lowest possible except for view distance and textures. Show FPS is on, but we also have frame view open. Now, as always, we do get massive frame drop in the lobby. That's just completely normal for Fortnite. It's loading like everyone in the area all at once. So that's normal, that's nothing new or interesting. But we're getting around like 70 FPS consistently, which is pretty good. It's not too far off from my 3060, which gets around 90 to 100 in the lobby. Now, this is where it's kind of sad, because honestly, the A770, based on what is in it, it should be as powerful, if not more powerful, than my 12 gig 3060. But in Fortnite, it's just not. And I think that comes down to like optimizations for specific graphics libraries. Because even with the RX 6700 XT, which I couldn't test because my brother has that, it gets not that much more FPS. It gets like 5 more FPS average than the 3060 back when it was in my actual system. I'm dead here. Unlucky. But it doesn't get that much more FPS, which is really interesting. That had to be a bot. String cheese 15. There's no way. I'm so dead here. Real quick, I'm gonna swap out our SATA SSD here with this Crucial Ballistics P3, or not Ballistics, just Crucial P3 Plus from my actual computer because I just upgraded the boot drive, and we are gonna copy over the OS from that. Oh, is there actually a screw in there? Wow. Boom. Easy. So, I had a bunch of footage that I was going to overlay with these graphs, but that was 4 months ago at this point. Footage is not great and technically outdated anyways. So at the time, I tried my best to get a wide spread of data. I heard that Arc doesn't do well with games using DirectX 11 and earlier, so I wanted to find games in my library that use DirectX 9, 10, and OpenGL. Unfortunately, the graph style changes as I made them, and they get more consistent at the end. It should be noted that all of my tests were performed in 1080p since I wasn't aware of any way to downscale 1440p or 4K to my 1080p monitor. My first test was LEGO Batman 2 from 2012. It uses DirectX 9 and I cranked the settings with no VSync and no motion blur. Oddly enough, the 6700 XT got over 200 frames per second while the 3060 and A770 barely got over 100. For a 13-year-old game, this is a bit upsetting, but these LEGO games are meant to have VSync anyways, because the physics are timed to the frame rate, so we get the pass. And my data could have been skewed or otherwise performed incorrectly to get this weird outlier. Next is Portal from 2007. Obviously, we cranked those settings all the way up, and I tested chambers 8 through 11 for some more diversity with larger environments and special effects. To my complete surprise, the A770 pulls ahead here, only by a few frames per second, but it's likely due to the increased memory bus width or the increase in pipelines from the AMD and NVIDIA contenders. Dishonored was my absolute favorite game to play on my Steam Deck when I was at school. Amazing story, not hard to run. That being said, it uses DirectX 9 and we cranked those settings too. All our contestants were neck and neck, but the Arc barely gets below 120 FPS, while the 3060 is a smidge ahead of our AMD alternative. And that leads us into A Hat in Time. The game uses DirectX 9, and I cranked these settings while also using a plethora of mods from the Steam Workshop. I tested this in Mafia Town on the level She Came From Outer Space, since it has some of the most intense effects in the game. Interestingly, the 8770 had the highest 1% lows and got a consistent 30 FPS, while the 3060 and 6700 XT stuttered constantly. I went through the level about 3 or 4 times with each of the cards to eliminate any shader caching, but it seems like Intel just has an edge when it comes to stutter. For our next game, I tricked out Fortnite with competitive settings, and I set the graphics API to DirectX 12 with FXAA. As previously noted, the 3060 at the highest frame rate, but yet again, the Arc has more consistent frame rate with few dips after a few matches. Here we saw about 100 FPS on average, while AMD had 110 and NVIDIA with 119. Close enough that realistically you wouldn't notice much of a difference. The finals is my favorite competitive shooter of all time. As of recording this data, we were on Season 5. For some reason, AMD had a considerable lead here, getting 79 frames per second on average. Each test did have a different map, so it's possible the maps were more favorable for the 6700 XT, but maybe the finals is just more optimized for AMD at this time? Needless to say, the Arc didn't do well here. This data was recorded prior to modding the motherboard BIOS to enable a resizable bar, so we could have left some performance on the table. Next up is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Uses DirectX 11, shockingly for a modern game, but I tested the intro sequence on the very high preset, while the 3060 got 60 FPS with 30 FPS 1% low. The Arc performed really terrible here. 40 frames per second with 18 frames per second for 1% lows. That's not a good look. Enabling ray tracing gave the 3060 the edge, but likely the game uses some trickery like enabling DLSS silently. Needless to say, it wasn't a good time for Intel. Elden Ring was probably my least favorite benchmark to run. I ran in a wide circle around a section of Limgrave on the max preset. Arc falls behind again, and it stuttered a lot at first when I benchmarked this. Again, it could be due to the lack of resizable bar. Surprise, surprise, enabling ray tracing with Elden Ring resulted in the same thing, Arc falling vastly behind the more optimized AMD and NVIDIA options. With Cyberpunk 2077, I took a lap around Lizzie's bar at night and made sure to stare at all the lights and reflections to really make the cards scream. I was genuinely shocked at this result. Despite completely forgetting to test the raster performance on the 6700 XT, the Arc pulls ahead. Sure, it's only about 48 FPS at 1080p Ultra with XeSS enabled, but the 1% lows are still above 30. When we turn on ray tracing, we get the same result. Arc has a more consistent frame rate, but since this was 4 months ago, it's possible that a lot of the Arc's performance was hampered by outdated drivers. For whatever reason, my graph here says that there is XeSS, but down there it also says there's none, so I'm not sure what's going on there. For my final test, I decided to use Minecraft 1.21.4 on fancy settings with a 16 chunk render and simulation distance. No shaders or other optimizations. This isn't hard at run at all, but it's more CPU bound than anything. And yet, the 3060 floored the 6700 XT and especially the A770. absolutely wild. And with that, I come to my conclusion. Should you buy an Arc A770 in 2025? Well, it depends. Since filming and making those graphs, I've exclusively used the A770 in my actual gaming rig. And you know what? I prefer it to the 3060. Now there are some caveats. Intel's graphics software isn't nearly as refined or clean as Nvidia or AMD's. Driver updates are few and far between and don't really disclose what they change, at least not through the software itself. Overclock settings are basically irrelevant since Sparkle and Intel themselves tweak these cards to their max. It gets very unstable very quickly, even with a 1% overclock. However, the color format, depth, quantization range, etc. are greatly appreciated to have within this software and are very easily accessible, especially if you work with a lot of art-related graphics or video editing. Intel's low latency doesn't really seem to have an impact for me, but I keep it set anyway since I have an Intel CPU and I just figured it would help even a little bit. Frame times have been consistent with Arc, and I rarely get stuttering, really only after major updates with the games while the card is recompiling shaders. If you're looking to play VR on Arc, then unfortunately you'll have to look elsewhere. To my knowledge, Intel still doesn't support VR on any Arc cards, but there are hacky workarounds. My solution was just to throw my old RTX 2060 in the gaming rig for VR and video encoding and decoding. Intel's hardware encoders are really good, but unless you're using AV1, which of course Premiere Pro doesn't support, it's going to look worse than NVENC. As of writing this script, you can get a renewed A770 Founders Edition for $279.99 USD, or the same MSI RTX 3060 Ventus that I have for $299.99 on sale on Amazon. It really depends on what you're looking for. $20 more and you get NVENC and VR, but less VRAM. However, assuming the sale ends on the 3060, you can get an RTX 5060 Ti with 16GB of VRAM for $420 USD right now. It's 2 generations newer with the same VRAM as Arc and a much better value despite the higher price tag. So ultimately, it's up to you. Thank you for watching and have a great day.